So now we got to move on to the next question. Does God exist? You guys ready to go? Yes. All right, good. I think we probably need to define what we mean by God if we're going to talk about God, because people have different conceptions of God. We're going to talk about a theistic God. A theistic God is a being who's beyond the world, who created and sustains the world. A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things, and whose every attribute is infinite. Now, it may help us to realize there's basically three religious worldviews out there. And you can put most world religions into one of these three worldviews. The first one here on the left, you see a world and some hands under it. That's theism. God made all. God created the universe and He sustains the universe. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam would be considered theistic. There's a being who created the universe and sustains the universe, but He's not the universe. That's theism. The second major worldview, you see just a hand in the world, is pantheism. God is all. God is me, God is you, God is the grass, God is the trees, God is the floor, God is the monitor, God is all of us. That's pantheism. God is all. Zen Buddhism, Hinduism, and the New Age are all pantheistic. You know Zen Buddhism. Use the Force, Luke. The whole Star Wars series is kind of a Zen Buddhist kind of thing. There's a force out there. It's not personal, but it's better if you tap into what's called the good side rather than the evil side. The last major worldview, you don't see a hand at all, you just see a world, is atheism, no God at all. Religious humanists would be considered atheists, or atheists could be considered religious humanists. Now, just about every major religion can be in one of these three categories. There's only one that can't. Can anyone see which one isn't in one of these categories? Major world religion. Polytheism, right? Polytheism isn't in one of these categories, but just about every other world religion you can put into one of these four, or one of these three, I should say. What we're going to do is give evidence for theism here in this segment. So a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian would probably agree with what we're going to say here. All right, so let's take a look at the evidence for theism. And there are three major arguments for theism we're going to talk about. There's more than this, but these are the main three. The first is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological is a Greek word, or it comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. And telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, there must be a designer. Now, these two arguments here, by the way, have scientific evidence behind them. We'll take a look at this scientific evidence here in a minute. The third argument doesn't have any scientific evidence behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children, and it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million Jews in a Holocaust, or it's wrong to crucify children like ISIS has done, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion. That's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. That's just your opinion against ISIS's opinion. But since we all know that certain things are really right and other things are really wrong, there must be a standard beyond us, an immaterial, authoritative, moral standard we might call goodness, righteousness, or justice that exists independent of what we think about it. It just is. That's what we mean by God's nature. We'll look at that later. Let's start here at the first argument, the cosmological argument. And this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know some of you who are Christians may be going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here. We don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang, the creation event, is so good, you even have atheists admitting it. For example, Stephen Hawking up the road here in Cambridge puts it this way: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. He's probably the most famous physicist in the world today. And he admits that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. Now, he tries to come up with another explanation other than God for the beginning, but he's admitting the data, that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. His explanation for how we got here is in his book, The Grand Design. I don't know if you've seen that book. It's about 5 years old. And on page 181, he says this: because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. To which John Lennox, who I mentioned last night, said, when nonsense is spoken by brilliant scientists, it's still nonsense. A law like gravity creating the universe out of nothing, what's he talking about? First of all, there was no law of gravity. There was nothing. No space, no matter, no time. Non-being. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said, nothing is what rocks dream about. That's nothing. There was no law of gravity. And even if there was a law of gravity, gravity doesn't create anything. Gravity just does the same thing over and over again. Once there's a material world, then gravity will describe what happens to certain bodies. But it doesn't, it's not a creative force. So Hawking is grasping for something other than God, but he's admitting the data that space, time, and matter had a beginning out of nothing. Now, another cosmologist by the name of Alexander Vilenkin. By the way, a cosmologist is not somebody that puts on your makeup, okay? A cosmologist is somebody that studies the origin of the universe. He's a Russian cosmologist who is an agnostic on the question of God. He doesn't know whether God exists or not, but here's what he said in his book, Many Worlds in One. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. In fact, 4 or 5 years ago, when Stephen Hawking had his 70th birthday party, Alexander Vilenkin went to visit him, and at the birthday party, Vilenkin gave a paper where he talked about the beginning of the universe. I guess these scientists, in order to have fun, give papers at birthday parties, right? So he read this paper that he wrote about how all the evidence that we have right now points to the fact that the universe had a beginning. Again, he's an agnostic, but he's saying, look, it had a beginning. Now, Vilenkin is actually a believer in what's called the multiverse. Have you heard of the multiverse? That there are many universes out there, and our universe just appears to be designed even though it really isn't, because just by the luck of the draw, we happen to have a universe with these kinds of characteristics about it, and that's why we're here. But even Vilenkin said, even if there are other universes out there, and by the way, there's no evidence there are other universes out there. There's no way to detect these other universes. But he says, look, even if there are other universes out there, all of them together would still need a beginning. So it would seem to me that if it still needs a beginning, you still need a beginner, right? Now, what is the evidence that's having these scientists and virtually all scientists saying the universe had a beginning? Well, here's the scientific evidence, and I have it in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. This will help you remember why we know the universe had a beginning. This is the scientific evidence. There's philosophical evidence we'll look at as well. And I'll just list what each of these letters stand for here, and then we'll spend just a few minutes on each one of them to show you why these scientists are saying the universe had a beginning. The S stands for the second law of thermodynamics. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding, and you'll see why that implies a beginning here in a few minutes. The R stands for the radiation afterglow, which actually is the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. We'll look at that in a few minutes. The G stands for great galaxy seeds. We'll get to that. Hang on. And E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity. So these scientific reasons are why scientists are saying, look, the universe had a beginning. So let's look at each one of these in order. We'll start with the second law. And the second law of thermodynamics says that the universe is running down. It's running out of usable energy. As time goes on, the amount of hydrogen atoms in that sun are burning up. Ultimately, that sun is going to burn out, and we're all going to go to heat death. Don't worry, apparently it's several billion or million years from now. But one day that sun is going to burn up. Okay, big deal. What does that mean? How does that show the universe had a beginning? Well, think about it this way. Think of the universe as a dying flashlight. If we were to take a flashlight right now and turn it on and put it here on the podium and leave and come back tomorrow, what would the strength of the beam coming out of the flashlight be tomorrow? Probably be a lot weaker, right? Because there's only so much juice in those batteries, and the longer you have it on, the less and less energy you're going to have, right? Well, suppose I had turned the flashlight on an infinitely long time ago, if you could. Would there be any light coming out of it today? No, it would have used up all its energy. Well, think about the universe as having batteries, like a flashlight. If you turned the universe on an infinitely long time ago, there'd be no energy left. The sun would be dead. We wouldn't have any heat. We wouldn't have any energy right now. But since the sun is still burning, that would mean that the universe had a beginning, that it didn't have an infinite past, that at some point somebody created it and now it's burning down. Everyone with me on this? Now, the second law of thermodynamics is also what's called the law of entropy or disorder, that things tend to go to disorder with time. We know this because this building, which was built in 1848, is that right? I mean, this is amazing how old the church is. But you notice we've had to do a few upgrades here since 1848, right? That nature runs things down. It runs things toward disorder. You see, nature will take a building and turn it into a pile of bricks, but nature will never take a pile of bricks and turn it into a building. You need somebody to order it. Things go to disorder. We learn as we get older. The second law of thermodynamics affects us because when you get older, you get dresser disease. That's when your chest falls into your drawers. You know that? That's what happens. We run down. Everything's running down. Well, if everything's running down, somebody must have wound it up in the beginning. And if the universe was infinite, we would have all run down a long time ago, but we haven't completely run down. So the universe had a beginning. This second law of thermodynamics is one of the most fundamental rules of all science, or laws of all science. In fact, this is sort of a closed area of inquiry in science. Nobody investigates whether or not you can make, say, a perpetual motion machine. Because we all know the second law of thermodynamics seems to be absolute, that things run down. So, we know the universe had a beginning from the second law of thermodynamics. The U in surge stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Anyone know who this guy is right here in the corner? Who said it? Whoa. Anyone know? That is Edwin Hubble from the famed Hubble Space Telescope. He has a telescope named after him now. Before the telescope was named after him, he was using this telescope at the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, California in 1929 to observe the galaxies out there. And Hubble, when he looked out at these galaxies, noticed that they were all moving away from us, that the entire universe appeared to be expanding. How did he know this? When he looked at the galaxies, the light from the galaxies was red, which showed that the galaxies were receding from us. They're all moving away. And Hubble deduced that if they're doing this now, if the universe is doing this, yesterday the universe was here. Yesterday, the day before that, it was here, before here. And he went all the way back in time until he realized that the entire universe came from a single point. A single point of nothing. There was no space, there was no matter, there was no time, and then the universe expanded from that point. In fact, he deduced this. He said, if the universe, or if time were reversed, the universe would have collapsed back to nothing. So there was no space, matter, or time in the beginning, according to Hubble. Now, Hubble, back in, I guess, 1929, he thought it was neat to have your picture taken with a pipe. You notice that? I don't know why he's got a pipe in his mouth, but they just thought it was neat back then. And this expanding universe got Hubble to think, well, it must have had a beginning then. Now, for many years, scientists thought, well, if it had a beginning, it probably had a beginning in a great explosion. But they thought there should be some remnant heat from that explosion still out there, but nobody bothered to look for the heat until two scientists discovered it by accident in 1965 at Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey, and that leads us to R, the radiation afterglow. This is Robert Wilson and Arno Penzias. And they discovered the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. This is literally the smoking gun to the Big Bang. There's heat still out there from the initial explosion. It's just a couple of degrees above absolute zero, but these guys discovered it in 1965, and they won Nobel Prizes for it in 1978. It would be like this. Suppose you're cooking cookies in your oven. And you open the oven, you take the cookies out, there's still heat coming out of the oven, right? Well, there's still heat coming off the universe right now from the initial explosion. And these gentlemen discovered it. And one agnostic astronomer by the name of Robert Jastrow said that when this discovery was made, this put the nail in the coffin of the last doubting Thomas who thought the universe was eternal. Because scientists 100 years ago thought the universe was eternal. It didn't have a beginning. But after they started making these discoveries, by 1965, they said, look, this theory, which was called the steady state theory, that the universe was eternal, this theory can no longer be believed. After we've discovered the smoking gun to the Big Bang, the last doubting Thomas has been convinced that the universe isn't eternal. It actually had a beginning. Now, scientists thought that if the universe did have a beginning, that there should be some temperature variations in what's called the radiation afterglow. And this acronym here, COBE, COBE, stands for Cosmic Background Explorer. It's a satellite. They tried to discover temperature variations in that radiation afterglow. They couldn't discover them from the Earth. They were going to have to put a satellite up to do so. And they were going to put the satellite up on the space shuttle, the United States Space Shuttle, so they could look at these temperature variations. But in 1986, the Challenger space shuttle exploded off the launching pad, and the space shuttle program was canceled for a while. So they actually put the satellite up on a rocket in 1989, and they put it up into orbit, and it circled the Earth for 3 years, measuring the temperature variations in the radiation afterglow, the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. And finally, by 1992, they had enough measurements to draw a conclusion. And this is the G, called the Great Galaxy Seeds, in our evidence here. And what they discovered were temperature variations that were so precise, down to 1 part in 100,000. And according to the theory, these temperature variations allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. And this was discovered, as I said, in 1992. They won Nobel Prizes for discovering this in 2006. In fact, the man who really headed the expedition was a man by the name of George Smoot. Here he is. And he taught at UC Berkeley. And he wrote a book called Wrinkles in Time. And Stephen Hawking, look at his endorsement right on the cover of the book. He said, the scientific discovery of the century, if not all time. Now, that may have been a bit of an overstatement. But the point here is that these temperature variations that they predicted, They actually found, and they were so precise, they were down to 1 part in 100,000. If those temperature variations were any different, according to them, there'd be no galaxies now. So they discovered these very fine temperature variations. And George Smoot won a Nobel Prize for discovering this, okay? Now, the E in surge stands for Einstein. And Einstein knew that the universe had a beginning as far back as 1916, when he came up with general relativity theory. He realized that if his general relativity theory was correct, that time, space, and matter are correlative. They came into existence together. He knew this, but he didn't like it. Einstein wanted the universe to be eternal. He wanted a steady state universe. So the great Einstein decided to put a fudge factor into his equations to allow the universe to be static and eternal. He wanted a counterforce to gravity. He didn't want this, because that would imply a beginning. He wanted this, a steady universe. So he put a fudge factor into his equations to keep the universe static and eternal. And some say that the great Einstein, in order to do this, divided by 0. Now, what are you told in grammar school? You never divide by 0. You can go straight to hell for that, right? Never divide by 0. Well, the great Einstein divided by 0, and mathematicians in the 1920s were looking at his equations going, Dr. Einstein, you can't divide by 0. Then, in 1929, Hubble discovers the expanding universe, which is what Einstein's theory of general relativity predicted 13 years earlier. So at one point, Hubble, after he discovers the expanding universe predicted by general relativity, he calls Einstein up and he says, Dr. Einstein, what you predicted 13 years ago, I'm actually seeing in my telescope. Why don't you come out to Mount Wilson here in Pasadena, California, and you can see the expanding universe for yourself. So in 1931, Einstein went out to California and he looked through Hubble's telescope. In fact, who's that right behind him? That's Hubble. You see the pipe right there? Einstein's looking through the telescope. He sees the expanding universe, and at a point later, after he got off the telescope, he said to the news media, he said, I now see the necessity for a beginning. The universe did have a beginning, and he said the cosmological constant, the fudge factor that he put into his equations, was his greatest mistake of his professional career. Now, it turned out that Einstein was actually right. There is a cosmological constant, but it wasn't the value that he had. The cosmological constant is now known as dark energy or dark matter that is actually accelerating the expansion of the universe right now. Did you know that the universe is accelerating in its expansion? The universe is expanding, and it's expanding at an accelerating rate, which makes us wonder, why is it, if the universe is expanding, why is it still so hard to find a parking spot here in London, right? You ever notice that? But yes, it's expanding at an accelerated rate, and we don't know why. We call it dark energy or dark matter, and that dark energy is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 160th power. We'll talk about fine-tuning here in a minute, but there's only 10 to the 80 atoms in the entire universe, and this is fine-tuned to 1 to the 160th power. It's a mind-boggling number. You can't even get your head around it. And what the scientists are saying is if that expansion, if that acceleration rate, that cosmological constant they call it, if it were any different, we wouldn't be here. In any event, the universe had a beginning. And Einstein, if he were here today, would say, look, it had a beginning no matter what you say, okay? So this leads us all to this guy, Robert Jastrow, who I mentioned earlier was an agnostic astronomer. In other words, he didn't know whether God existed or not. In fact, he said in 1978, well, he actually wrote a book called God and the Astronomers, and he updated this book in 1992. He went through the evidence we just did, we had gone through to that point, the surge evidence. And on page 1 of the book, This guy worked for NASA, by the way. On page 1 of his book, he says, I'm an agnostic on religious matters. In fact, he said, look, I don't know whether God exists or not, but on page 14 of the book, here's what he said. Again, the book's called God and the Astronomers. He said, the astronomical evidence leads to a biblical view of the origin of the world. The essential element in the astronomical and biblical accounts of Genesis is the same. Then he went on in an interview to say this, and this is, by the way, this is an actual picture of Saturn from the Hubble Space Telescope. That's not a painting. That's Saturn in infrared. Here's what Jastrow, the agnostic astronomer, said in an interview. He said, astronomers now found they painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth, and they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Now, wait a minute. Wait. Why would an agnostic astronomer say it's scientifically proven that supernatural forces are at work? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Anyone? There was no nature. Nature had a beginning. In fact, I was at another event at the University of Michigan a few years back, and during the Q&A, an atheist got up to the microphone after I'd gone through this evidence, and he said, if you give science enough time, we're going to figure out a natural cause for the universe. And I said to him, John, that sounds a lot like faith. Right? That's what it is. Science hasn't found it yet, so just give science more time, have faith, and we're gonna find it. Right? Why will we never find a natural cause for the universe if the evidence that we have now is correct? Why will we never find a natural cause? Because nature itself was created, so nature can't be the cause. Nature is what the effect is. So if nature had a beginning, whatever created nature must be beyond nature. In other words, must be supernatural. That's what we mean by the word super, right? It means beyond. In fact, I said to John that night, I said, John, you're saying that if you just give me more time, I'll figure out a natural cause for all of nature. That would be like me saying, if you give me more time, one day I'll figure out I gave birth to my own mother. Right? There's no way that's conceivably possible. It's impossible in principle. If space, matter, and time had a beginning, whatever created space, matter, and time can't be made of space, matter, and time. Right? In other words, the cause must transcend space, matter, and time. The cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, because only persons can make choices, and someone had to choose to create. As I mentioned earlier, gravity can't choose to create anything. Gravity just does the same thing over and over again, right? I mean, gravity isn't sitting there going, look, if Turek drops that remote one more time, I'm not going to pull it to the ground, right? No, gravity just does the same thing over and over again. In order to create something, you got to be a person. You got to have a personhood. Also, the being must be intelligent, because as we'll see here in a couple of minutes, the universe is designed, it's fine-tuned. Now, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? That's what we mean by God. Now, it wasn't just Jastrow who said these kind of things. Every one of these scientists I'm about to quote here have won Nobel Prizes for discovering some of the surge evidence. They're not Christians. They're just people who are following the evidence where it leads. Arno Penzias said this: the best data we have concerning the Big Bang are exactly what I would have predicted had I had nothing to go on but the 5 books of Moses, the Psalms, and the Bible as a whole. His colleague, Robert Wilson, who discovered the radiation afterglow, said, certainly there was something that set it all off. I can't think of a better theory of the origin of the universe to match Genesis. George Smoot, he said this, there is no doubt that a parallel exists between the Big Bang as an event and the Christian notion of creation from nothing. Again, these are scientists. Now, that's the scientific evidence that the universe had a beginning. I want to give you, I think, even a more compelling case that philosophy shows the universe had a beginning. Certainly, time had a beginning. Let's just take a timeline. Here's the timeline. Here's today. There's yesterday. There's the day before yesterday. There's last week. Let's say we don't know how far back this timeline goes. Question. Can this timeline be infinite into the past? This is the interactive portion of the program. Can it be infinite back there? Some say yes, some say no. All right, let me ask you a question. What is the definition of an infinite? Something that has no end, right? Well, here we are today. We're at the end. So can this line be infinite? No, because an infinite has no end, right? It can't be infinite. And can you add anything to an infinite? No, by definition, an infinite, whatever it is the sum of all possible numbers. But tomorrow, when tomorrow comes, we're going to add another day. And the day after that, we'll add another day. And the day after that, we'll add another day. You get the idea. So this timeline, no matter how far back it goes, can't be infinite. It had to have a beginning. In fact, in order for today to arrive, there can't be an infinite number of days before today. Why not? Because today never would have arrived. Why? Because if there's an infinite number of days before today, you'd always have to live another day before today got here. Why? Because there's an infinite number of them. I know this can give you intellectual constipation. But think about it. If the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. But since today is here, there must have been a beginning. So time had a beginning. Now, this is what general relativity shows you as well, that space, time, and matter are correlative. They came into existence together. So all this comes together from the science and the philosophy to show that the universe had a beginning. The universe had a beginning. So if the universe had a beginning, we've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, here's my only question. Which view is more reasonable? That no one created something out of nothing, or that someone created something out of nothing? What do you think? Someone, right? I was at Texas A&M in Texas, a college down there a few years back, and I put this slide up, and one atheist said, oh, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, number one, hang on, let's take a look at number two. Number two says someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? Because you got someone creating something out of nothing. That's a miracle, but at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality. And by the way, the law of causality does not say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be something out there that didn't have a cause. There has to be something out there that is what Aristotle would call the unmoved mover, or the Bible would call the great I am. The being that just exists. The being whose essence equals his existence. The being who is infinite, completely actualized, as Aristotle would say, or as Thomas Aquinas would say. The being that doesn't get its being from anything else. He's the ground of all reality. The foundation of everything that exists. Now you've got two possibilities. Either that being is the universe, or that being is beyond the universe, that transcends the universe. Well, all the evidence shows the universe had a beginning. So the being that is the great I am is what we would mean by God. So I said to the audience at Texas A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There is nobody here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing, by nothing, in your dorm room and is currently defecating on your pillow. Right? You don't worry about that, right? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. You're not worried that as you sit here right now, a rhinoceros is going to appear out of nothing, by nothing, right here in this auditorium and charge into the audience. You're not worried about that, right? Things don't happen that way. And if the atheists are trying to tell us that the universe could pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause, then why doesn't everything do that? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Could have saved me $3,000 if I had just been more patient, right? Why don't Mercedes Benzes pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Or Teslas? Why don't they do that? If you're hungry after we do this seminar today and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one? Or should you just sit there at home, wait, and hope that one pops into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? I'm telling you, it's the atheists that have all the faith. They're believing that the universe could pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. At least some of them are saying that now. So, my question to atheists is this. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? If there is no God, how did any of this get here? If they try and say the universe has always existed, I'm going to say surge, and the end of infinite time is impossible. The universe, the time had a beginning. And by the way, this answers the question, because you always get the question, who made God, right? What's the answer? No one. He is the unmade maker. He's the uncreated creator. Look, if you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No, he's timeless. That's the point. He is the uncreated creator. He is the unmoved mover. You know, for many years, atheists had no problem believing in an eternal universe. They thought the universe was eternal. And now, suddenly, they're having a problem believing in an eternal God. Why? If you can believe in an eternal universe, you certainly can believe in an eternal God, right? They just don't like where the evidence is leading. In fact, you might wonder, you might say, how do atheists respond to this? Poorly, all right? In fact, does anyone know who Lawrence Krauss is? Has anyone heard this name? Lawrence Krauss is a physicist. He teaches in Arizona in the United States. He's a very good presenter. If you look him up on YouTube, you'll enjoy watching him. But he's an atheist. He's not just an atheist. He's actually an anti-theist. In fact, he says, I'm an anti-theist like my friend Christopher Hitchens. When Hitchens was around, he didn't not just believe in God. He didn't want there to be a God. He was against God. And that's what Krauss says he is as well. And he wrote a book a few years back called A Universe from Nothing, in which he tries to show how a universe like ours could come into existence out of nothing and by nothing, without God. Unfortunately for Krauss, his definition of nothing isn't really nothing. It's something. He talks about quantum vacuums. Well, a quantum vacuum is something. And he's saying the universe came from a quantum vacuum. Well, a quantum vacuum, if it did come from a quantum vacuum, someone has to ask, where did the quantum vacuum come from? Right? Now, this was not lost on a comedian in our country by the name of Stephen Colbert. And a few years back, Colbert had a program where he would invite guests on and interview them. And Colbert invited Lawrence Krauss to come on his show. And when a comedian can see through the errors in your book, it's fun. So I want to show you the interview that Stephen Colbert had with Lawrence Krauss on Krauss's book, and then we'll talk about it. You guys ready? Yeah. Here we go.
Okay, doctor. Sweep away thousands of years.
That's Colbert.
Of mystery and awe at creation that let the greatest minds in civilizations all over the world to lead to one point, a single divine loving creator. Destroy it. Why is there something instead of nothing?
It's really easy because nothing's unstable. And in fact, there's no evidence for any deity. Everything we know about the laws of physics, which are remarkable, and have changed everything about the way we think about the universe, what nothing is and what something is. This table here is mostly empty space.
This table cost me $500. You tell me I got ripped off? Well, no, wait, let's go back a second, okay? Nothing is unstable. What do you mean that nothing is unstable? Nothingness is nothingness.
Well, the physics has changed what we mean by nothing. In fact, nothing is an empty space, is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence.
Oh, wait,
so
no,
fast,
that's not nothing. That's something.
Why
are those virtual particles there?
Because the laws of quantum mechanics, and they tell us that even though you can try and count and see what's in there in empty space, you'll see nothing. But in fact, one of the biggest mysteries, and the reason I wrote the book, one of the greatest discoveries of the last 50 years is that, in fact, empty space weighs something.
Empty space weighs something.
In fact, it's the dominant stuff in the universe.
So I
is almost everything.
am never going to lose those last 5 pounds. Okay, you say there are 3 different types of nothing.
That's right.
What are the 3? I didn't know there was such a variety. A sampler platter of
I would have thought you'd be an expert on it, but
on
in any
nothingness?
case,
Yes.
In any case, there are 3 different kinds of nothing. First, empty space, which I'd say is probably the nothing of the Bible, an eternal, dark, empty void.
Do you mean like a true hard vacuum? That's nothing that you're talking about?
Most people would have thought that would be nothing.
That's what I think nothing is.
And then I tell you that,
Also, Baltimore.
but then if I tell you that kind of nothing actually is unstable, if you wait long enough, that kind of nothing will always produce particles.
By saying that it will...
If you wait long enough, the laws of quantum mechanics tell us that particles will burp out of empty space and eventually fill up a universe. It's really remarkable.
To me, that sounds like the empty space may be empty to us, but it is some sort of sheath or membrane between us and some other reality.
No, there's nothing. Well, there's absolutely nothing there until there's something.
What's the second type of nothing?
Okay, well then if you don't buy that, then I can say, well, you might say, well, that's not nothing because there's space.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out if you apply quantum mechanics to gravity, then in fact, space itself becomes dynamical, and universes, spaces themselves, and time can pop into existence where there was none before.
So in some theoretical end space, before the moment of creation, there can be no time and no space and no energy?
And no energy. Zero
energy. And then
energy.
suddenly, from nowhere and from nothing, comes something and somewhere.
And all sorts of stuff. And it sounds like the ultimate free lunch. And
yes,
it is.
It is.
It is. And what's remarkable is it's possible without any supernatural shenanigans.
But listen, stop with that.
Why?
Why is what you're doing, whatever this is? Because obviously, because I am not in the priesthood, I can't understand the scrawls on the blackboards you people down at, where are you?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, so you could.
Where are you? You're Arizona State.
Arizona State.
Okay, you priests of theoretical physics, you can explain to each other what you mean with your language of math, and I have to take that on faith.
No, in fact, you should be skeptical.
I am.
And in fact, you should. I know. And that's why you should. That's why I tried to find the arguments in the book.
But I will never read it. So why other people should? You should buy it.
Buying it is important.
Buying is good. Okay. But why does what you're saying have to be an attack on my God?
It doesn't have to be an attack.
But that's all you've done. You've attacked my God for the last 6 minutes.
No, you have. All I've said is you don't need him.
That's an attack.
No.
Of course, we are here to love God,
the universe, as we understand it, we have changed our minds about the universe. We've learned that the universe is more remarkable than anything we ever thought before. And in fact, changing your mind and in fact being wrong is wonderful. You should try it sometime. It's really amazing. It means that the fact that the universe is more remarkable than the fairy tales that were talked about by Bronze Age illiterate peasants before we knew the Earth orbited the sun.
You're not attacking at all, but go ahead.
No, but I mean,
but Leslie, so you believe there's no God?
I don't even use the word believe. The point is
There is no God.
There's no need for God.
Is there God? Is there God?
It's
what would you
unlikely.
say?
There's no evidence for God.
Okay.
There's no evidence for
So
God.
let me ask something. If there is no God, okay, if there is no thing called God, if he is nothing, can't something come from him?
That's pretty bad, isn't it? If you have a talk show host, a comedian that can do that to your theory. If he is nothing, can something come from him? In fact, notice what Krauss was saying during the interview. He was basically saying that space, matter, and time can come into existence as long as you start with space, matter, and time. Did you see that? Remember, he kept talking about, well, if you wait long enough, what's this wait business? There's no time, right? I mean, he says if you wait long enough, and then he also says, according to the laws of quantum mechanics, where laws come from? They come from lawgivers. The law of gravity, he's assuming what he's trying to prove. Do you see the problem here? So Krauss's book, and I critique his book in our book, Stealing from God, in the first chapter, if you're interested in going further. The other theory that is very popular now to try and avoid the beginning and the design beginning, we're about to look at design here a little bit later, is something called the multiverse. I mentioned that earlier, the multi-universe theory. And a number of years back, the magazine National Geographic took the liberty of drawing for us what the multiverse might look like. Here it is. Self-generating universes, multiple universes grow like branches from a tree trunk in a model that allows the universe to create itself. Can you create yourself? No. I don't know about you, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm not going to let some graphic artist down at National Geographic draw some sort of demented French horn to get me to believe that's how we got here. One scientist in the article was very honest. Here's what he said. He said, it's sort of like we're brushing our ignorance under the rug of the very early universe. Indeed. Now, this all led Robert Jastrow, again, the agnostic astronomer I mentioned earlier, who wrote God and the Astronomers, to end his book this way. He goes through all the evidence the universe had a beginning, and he gets to the very end of the book, and this is the last line in the book. Remember, he's an agnostic. Here's what he says. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. No doubt reading Genesis 1:1. The best evidence we have shows that Genesis 1:1 appears to be true. In the beginning, God, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator, created the heavens and the earth. That's the best evidence we have. All right, let's keep moving. We'll go to the fine-tuning argument, and then we'll take a break. So the second argument for God is the teleological argument. And this can go back to William Paley, who actually said, look, if you found a watch in the woods, would you think it was made by natural law? You know, or you're walking along out here on the street and you see right there on the sidewalk a diamond-studded Rolex. So you pick that up and you go, I'm not going to turn this in. This was made by the wind and the rain. Now, you'd say if there's a watch, there's got to be a watchmaker. Well, it turns out that both the universe and life they appear to be designed anyway. And they're even more designed than what we might say a watch is like. And we just talked about how the universe came into existence out of nothing. We're now going to try and show that the universe came into existence out of nothing with extreme precision. And for that, I want to go to a guy who wrote something that I don't know if you've ever seen, but has anyone seen this name before? Chuck Lorre. Does anyone know who this guy is? Who is he? Yes, he is a producer of American TV shows, one's called The Big Bang Theory and some others. He, at the end of these programs, will put something up on the screen after all the credits have run, and he'll put it up on the screen for maybe 2 seconds. And there's no way you can read the whole thing without having a DVR and pausing it and reading it. And I happened to notice one that he put up at the end of one of these programs, and here's what it said, okay? He's a TV producer. I don't know what his religious beliefs are, but here's what he said. In no particular order, I could not or would not exist without air, food, water, gravity, tides, the moon, the sun, night, civilization, the laws of physics, the laws of thermodynamics, the law of the land, ancestors having sex, DNA, viruses, bacteria, plants, animals, oceans, ice caps, the kindness of strangers, the Big Bang, familial bonds, smart people, brave people, memory, medicine, the periodic table of elements, tribal instincts, magnetic fields, weather, Earth's molten core, rotating Earth, tilted Earth, tectonic plates, sleep, death, heat, consciousness, evolution, teachers, and the miraculous, self-regulating chemical factory that is my body. Other than that, I like to think of myself as a self-made man. I mean, think about all these things we're dependent on to even be here. And some of these things he mentions in here in a fun way are actually new discoveries in science. New discoveries over the past 50 or 60 years. What these scientists have discovered is something called the fine-tuning of the universe. As I say, just in the past 50 or 60 years, what they've discovered is there are certain aspects about our universe, constants of nature, laws of nature, that are so precisely designed, initial conditions of our creation, that are so precisely designed, they are just where they need to be, that if they were slightly different in either direction, just slightly, there would be no universe, there'd be no life. In fact, let's start at the beginning. This is the beginning of the universe. Stephen Hawking, again an atheist, puts it this way. He says, with the proof, or he says, if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. In other words, if the expansion rate from the very beginning was slightly different from what it really was, there would be no universe, there would be no life. Now, this actually is an underestimate by Hawking, but he's showing that the initial conditions of the universe were just right, balanced on a razor's edge, change change the expansion rate either way, we're not here. Now, you can't make any evolutionary argument to account for this. Why not? Why can't you say, well, the expansion rate evolved to this point? Can anyone see why? Because these are the initial conditions of the universe. This is from the very beginning, a second after the Big Bang. So there's no evolution going on here. These are the initial conditions. The same being that created space, matter, and time appears to be the same being that created the expansion rate to be just what it is. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, we wouldn't exist. Now, what's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way, by the way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity's not measured in inches. This is just to give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction across the scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. Now, there's only 3 possible reasons for that value being right where it is. Physical necessity, it had to be there. No, it didn't have to be there. It could have been here, could have been here, could have been 1 trillion miles that way or 1 trillion miles that way. Chance, it just so happened to fall there. I don't have enough faith to believe that. In fact, chance is not a cause. Whenever scientists use the word chance, what do they really mean? They mean, we don't know. That's what they mean. I mean, there's not a force out there known as chance that causes things, right? Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. It's not a force. It's not a cause. It's a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. When they're using the word chance, they really mean we don't know. After physical necessity and chance, the only other option I can think of is design. Somebody designed it to be right there. That seems to be the best explanation. The same being that created the universe is the same being that said, this will be the gravitational force. This will be the expansion rate. Change it slightly, we're not here. Now, there's more than 30 of these kinds of constants about our universe. Change any one of them, we don't exist. Also, you can make an argument that our solar system is designed with us in mind. Where are we in the solar system? Right there, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to, or a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it is just right. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours. Change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us. Change that slightly, we don't exist. Oxygen in this room right now is 21%. If it were 15%, we'd all suffocate. If it were 25%, spontaneous fires would break out. If Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Asteroids, right? Jupiter is a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these purple marks are here? Those purple marks are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. Saturn does the same thing for us, by the way. In fact, you want to see the size of Jupiter? Check this out. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, Pluto recently has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. All right, take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. There it is. Take a look at this. That's Arcturus. That's another star in our galaxy. Here's the sun over here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto? Forget about it. All right, keep an eye on Arcturus now. Where is Arcturus now? Right here, left of the white star Regal. See that there? That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about them. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. The heavens are awesome. This is just in our galaxy. This is not outside our galaxy. In fact, the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles. All that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles. How far is 30 trillion miles? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. So I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles at 5 miles a second? It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star in our galaxy, an average distance away, you'd be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We can hardly get out of our solar system. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. I mean, think about that. We're never going to get there. It's just too far. Not only that, it's too dangerous. Now, how many stars are out there? The number of stars that are out there are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. You see this picture here? On the left, this is from the ground. You see that little square right there? That's from the Hubble Space Telescope. Those are stars. Bodies, heavenly planets, heavenly bodies, planets. To whom will you compare me, or who is my equal, says the Holy One. In other words, you want a comparison? You want to know what I'm like, God says? Here's what he says. Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these stars and named them one by one? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. You want to know who God is like? Most Christians have the wrong idea of who God is like. We think God is a big angel. No, God is not a big angel. You want to know what God is like? Meditate on the attributes of God. Spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, loving, just, intelligent, all-knowing. Meditate on those attributes. Then remove all limits from your mind. That's God. When you consider a being like that, might you then realize that when something goes wrong in your life, according to our standards of wrong, that maybe he has a reason we don't know about as to why he's allowing that? Why is there a second commandment? Thou shalt make no graven image. Because any image you make of an infinite being necessarily limits his majesty. You can't draw a picture of an infinite being. Oh, you can draw a picture of Jesus. Why? Because Jesus has two natures. He has a divine nature and a human nature. I mean, you can draw a picture of Jesus' human nature. You can't draw a picture of Jesus' divine nature. It's unlimited. And that's why both the Old and the New Testament say the heavens declare the glory of God. You want to know what God is like? Look to the heavens. His invisible qualities and divine attributes are clearly seen from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. In fact, that's how we know God exists. We know God by his effects. We see a creation, we know there must be a creator. We have a moral law written on our hearts, we know there must be a moral lawgiver. You see stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. You get the idea of an awesome creator. Psalm 103 verse 11 says, God's love to those that fear him exceeds the height of the heavens above the earth. How high are the heavens above the earth? Stars equivalent to grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth. 200,000 years at 5 miles a second between those stars. From our perspective, infinite. That's the point.